Last season, I briefly mentioned that local nurseries being used in marijuana grow operations were not uncommon in the area of Florida where the David Ricketson murder took place. The 168-acre parcel of land was purchased by Clyde Ricketson from 3 men who had a marijuana grow on the property previously. In 1987, 3 years before David Ricketson was killed, one of those men and his wife were arrested in Orange County on charges of selling the plants that had been cultivated in their small backyard nursery, which investigators said was valued at around $400,000. What followed was an investigation that led to a judge accusing agents of the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation of lying and covering up the burglary done by an informant to get evidence for one of the agency's biggest marijuana seizures. That search warrant was tossed by the judge. But this investigation was one of many that was going on. Long, ongoing investigations in Lake, Orange, and Seminole counties, which were all rife with secret pot operations during the 70s and all the way through the 90s, and I dare say continue to be. Although the landscape is quite a bit different now, and I don't mean the actual foliage, I'm talking about the political and social landscape of marijuana. I'm telling you all this because the distance between David Ricketson's nursery property and where our next story takes place, as the crow flies, is about 27 miles. And were a crow to fly that distance, ascend and descend with the wind, swirling all around the outlying towns, that crow might have more easily seen those telltale pointy leaves amid the other vegetation, if said product wasn't already packaged and awaiting pickup in a barn somewhere that provided enough distance between the owner and someone else's property to allow for plausible deniability.
The crop is as high as an elephant's eye, so are the people who smoke it. So are the illegal profits. Jerry Bowen reports tonight on the high-tech battle of wits over stamping out the bad seed.
Officers from a multi-agency task force are stepping up their annual raids. Helicopter crews spot the subtle marijuana green in the dense forest, and ground crews move in. This day, agents removed more than $3 million in plants, along with irrigation drip lines and timers installed by the absentee growers to nourish the crop. And this year, they say, $500 million worth of plants have been seized. Homegrown stuff that will never get to market, forcing some of the state's sneakiest farmers to get out of the business or get their business out of the state.
For the first time since 1984, the smuggling of marijuana is on the increase. This 7 tons of marijuana discovered in a Miami warehouse came from Colombia, trucked through Mexico to Florida, the long way around, because marijuana smuggling is back. In recent years, the U.S. drug blockade has slowed the flow of large shiploads of marijuana from South America, but that's made the trade more profitable.
This has caused a shortage of marijuana, and of course, when you have a shortage of a desired product, the price goes up.
It's doubled, in fact, to more than $700 a pound. Smuggling even small amounts of marijuana is now worth the risk of arrest.
The demand continues to be high, and we're faced with another problem, an overburdening problem.
The market for pot is a big one. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, an estimated 18 million Americans use marijuana.
In Florida, it has become so profitable, people are growing marijuana like tomatoes. A pound of one of the new potent homegrown strains can bring as much as $3,000. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement sends in agents to help understaffed local sheriffs go after marijuana growers. Agents pull up 100,000 plants a year in Florida, much of it planted on state and federal land.
Had we not got into the program when we did, we would have had a problem in Florida that would have reached epidemic proportions by now.
Nationally, the government estimates growers are using more than 1 million acres of federal land for marijuana. The Florida Highway Patrol's traffic control plane was finding so many marijuana plots.
If you look right down there, you can see 2 plots right below us, right down there now.
Pot eradication is now a regular part of a trooper's job.
This season's case wasn't about pot. Well, not exactly. But one of the theories that surrounds her case certainly has pot in its periphery. A tangential relationship, if you will, and, at points, a murder investigation converged with the drug investigation. Patricia Smith, or Patty, was born in Liverpool, Ohio. She moved to the Forest City area of Orlando, near Apopka, in 1950. Her parents and all but one of her siblings also lived in the area at the time of her death. Patty worked at the State Bank of Apopka, the oldest bank in the area at the time. It sat right there on Main Street since the early 1900s. In March of 1977, a newspaper announced that their bank's board of directors had promoted Patty to Assistant Operations Officer. Just a little over a year later, 35-year-old Patty Smith was found dead in her tidy concrete block home on Gay Street. Definitely not an area that you would expect for death to arrive, unless that death involves natural causes. Orlando Sentinel reporter Leslie Albin described the area of Forest City in Seminole County like this. The town is dimpled with lakes. From time to time, horseback riders jaunt down the streets, which tend to change abruptly from asphalt to dirt. Forest City sits between the apartment complexes of Altamont Springs to its west and Apopka to its east. Now, Apopka is known as the indoor foliage capital of the world because of its multi-million-dollar foliage industry. The city boasts numerous greenhouses and family-owned nurseries on its outskirts. Detective Bob Simmons was an officer with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office who had more than once been recognized in detective magazines for his distinguished service, including the 1979 issue of True Detective. You guys know that magazine, right? You can picture the pulp-esque covers, and those magazines back then almost always feature the image of a woman in peril, often scantily clad, with either the bad guy trying to kill her or the good guy trying to save her. The headlines screamed out things like, "Case of the Lust Killer Who Wasn't There," and "Homicide Ended Her Love Affair." But apparently inside these magazines there were real case stories featured, and Detective Bob Simmons of the Seminole County Sheriff's Office had been in a couple. Simmons was assigned the lead on Patty Smith's case about 90 minutes after her body was found. Early newspaper reports noted that Patty's sister had received a call from fellow bank employees when Patty didn't show up for work on Monday, June 26, 1978. She hurried over to Patty's house, but the doors were locked, so she had to borrow a knife from a neighbor to get in the house. What I am certain further complicated, or at least strained, resources that day was that only hours later, about 5 hours to be exact, another woman who lived about a half a mile away was found floating in her pool, fully clothed. According to newspaper accounts, Evelyn Rogers was found by her mother in a pair of cut-off blue jeans and a red sleeveless shirt that was turned wrong side out. Several medium-sized rocks were found at the bottom of the pool, and her sliding glass door was unlocked. Inside, her stove was on. The telephone receiver was off the hook in her bedroom. Just to clarify right off the bat, both of these cases remain unsolved today. At the time, obviously reporters were asking if police thought these deaths were related. Initially they said they weren't sure, but there were similarities. Both women were 35 and kept to themselves. They lived a very short distance from one another, and both were found dead in their homes early on Monday morning. The medical examiner said that the drowned woman showed no signs of being beaten, however possibly strangled, but unfortunately both her and Patty's bodies were decomposed enough that certain things would be forever unknowable. Both women had been dead about 2 days before they were found. The Seminole County medical examiner, G.V. Garay, performed both autopsies. He said he believed that Patty Smith had been strangled, but because of decomposition he would have to wait for more tests to come back. But at that time a sheriff's office spokesman told reporters,
"We're positive Miss Smith was murdered."
A few days later, an ME assistant said certain cells which pick up small pieces of debris are present when the victim has been strangled, and these cells were found in Miss Smith's body, but not in Miss Dennis's. They could not determine at the time whether either woman was sexually assaulted. Today, the Unsolved Homicide page says Patty Smith was strangled, but doesn't say what the cause of death for Evelyn Dennis was, just that she was found floating in the pool. Here are the details outlined in the Orlando Sentinel about how Patty Smith was found. She was lying in her bed on her back, a bed that they described as unmessed, with her head cushioned between two pillows. One account said her shorts and panties were found on the floor beside the bed. Another article says that her panties were on but pulled down, and described a halter top pulled up to her shoulders rather than a bra. There was a hairdryer in a box on the floor, with its cord beneath Patty's arm and shoulder, and it was plugged into a socket above her head. She was also laying on top of a hand mirror and a wire clothes hanger. There was no robbery, the doors to her home were locked, and there were no signs of struggle. Now, you might be asking yourselves, Jenny, why do you keep referring to what was reported in the newspaper? Why haven't you mentioned what the police reports say? Well, that's because I submitted a records request to Seminole County Sheriff's Office, and they promptly denied my request, citing, quote, an active criminal investigation, Florida Statute 119.0712C, to be specific. I replied to ask where I should submit my appeal, and I received this in response.
Per Florida Statute 119.0712C, there is no appeal process, as this is an active criminal investigation.
But is it? Is it really? How active is a case that's over 4 decades old? And a quick Google search shows me that the agency in question has not done a single public push via media to garner more leads. I would argue not very active. So I spent a couple days after that researching case law, because I like nothing more than a challenge that I'm probably going to lose. I fashioned a wordy 14-page appeal, and I sent it directly to Seminole County's state attorney, who I hoped would at least be charmed by my efforts. But, spoiler alert, a lot of what I hope is essentially the fantasy world that I live in for a good part of my everyday. A world where the spirit of the law should at least be taken into account, and where exemptions are construed narrowly and not abused to prevent disclosure of information forever on the mere possibility that something might come of it all. I never want to believe that any governing body interested in transparency ever intends to permit the disclosure of files forever, because that goes directly against the spirit of what freedom of information laws are about, doesn't it? Anyway, while I waited for a response, I pulled up every newspaper article on Patty's death that I could find. Bill Arrowsmith, the vice president of the bank where she worked, who was also a sitting Apopka city council member, was quoted as saying,
Patty was an excellent employee. She'd been with us for 18 years, ever since getting out of Apopka High School. We became concerned Monday when she didn't come to work. We called her home and got no answer, so we called her sister, who went to the house and found her.
Arrowsmith said that Patty was well liked by everyone in the bank.
She was more than an employee. She was like a friend to everyone.
Neighbors said that Patty was quiet and never bothered anybody. They would see her out mowing her grass, but that was really it. One neighbor said that he wished all of his neighbors were like Patty Smith. The neighbor who had loaned her sister the knife to gain entrance into her home said, quote, I just saw her on Saturday morning. She was all tickled because she was going out square dancing. Through more newspaper articles, I was able to verify that there was a square dance held Saturday night, June 24th, at the Apopka Community Center. Admission was $3 a couple. I just don't know if Patty ever made it there. Another neighbor mused, I can't understand how it could happen with people so close and them not hearing anything. The houses are so close together. And it is one of those neighborhoods where the houses are probably 15 or 20 feet from one another. You could stand at your window and hear a conversation happening in a neighbor's home if both windows were open and you were so inclined. Nobody heard anything, according to newspaper accounts, except one woman who heard dogs barking around 2 a.m. on Monday near Patty's house. Nobody else noticed anything unusual. 4 days after both women were found, police said they had nothing to tie the two deaths together. They had no indication that the women even knew each other, and they had been assigned 2 different investigators. They did say that there were no signs of burglary at either home. And I think they were saying that because there had been a rash of burglaries in the area in the months prior to this, and neighbors had mentioned this when they were interviewed. But a quick check reveals that law enforcement had just made multiple arrests for a ring of teen offenders committing robberies in the area, and they had confiscated about $3,000 worth of stolen merchandise. Since there was nothing reported stolen from Patty's home, it doesn't look like robbery was the motive. However, it is of interest that just that Saturday night, Patty had reported to a deputy that someone broke a glass window and unlocked a door in her garage. Newspapers said that report was taken at 11:07 p.m. Saturday night. If she did end up going square dancing that night, this report may have occurred when she returned home and found that broken window. Sheriff spokesman John Spolsky said this of that break-in.
Detectives aren't disregarding the information about the burglary as part of their investigation in the murder, but that information only indicates that Miss Smith was alive at the time. We have other information that she was alive even after that time.
It seems like it would be relevant if earlier on the day that she died, someone had tried to break into her home. According to newspaper reports, police believed Patty died sometime on Saturday or in the wee hours into Sunday, despite not being found until Monday. Patty's boss, Tim Robinson, said,
Patty put her whole life into it when she did a job. She did it right. The bank was a big part of her life.
He said most of the employees, except for the newest ones who stayed back to work at the bank, went to her funeral.
Everybody's afraid to think anything. Everybody's afraid to say anything. Everybody's still in shock. It came in 2 stages. First, we find out that she died over the weekend. Then on Tuesday, we find out it's a homicide. It's like 2 shocks there.
Patty's seriousness about her job at the bank is one of the things that caused speculation about motive in this case. She had been promoted to a supervisory position just a year before she died, and the newspaper reported that she led a staff of 11, supervising the bank's bookkeeping, customer service, and records. As I often find when I research decades-old cases, there is a period of time where the newspapers cover a case. There will be a flurry of initial articles if you're lucky, and after a few days and a couple weeks, tops, there's nothing. That was essentially the same thing here. It would be a few years later when there would be more newspaper coverage and more details would emerge. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, essentially Florida State Police, began their investigation in 1983, and the public only learned about that a couple years later in 1985, when the Orlando Sentinel did a series of articles, and right out of the gate, things get complicated. The headline is Death of Apopka Woman Still a Mystery to Family and Detective. The article's written by Elaine Bennett and Lauren Ritchie.
For 7 years after Patricia Smith's body was found lying on the bed in her Forest City home, investigators from 4 law enforcement agencies assumed she was murdered. Now they're not sure.
You might be wondering about the whole 4 law enforcement agencies thing. Well, we've got the Seminole County Sheriff's Department, who were the lead on the case because of jurisdiction. We've got the FDLE, the state agency that did their own investigation, as often occurs. And I'm not sure who the 2 other agencies are that they're speaking about, but there might be some clues. An Orlando agency and a Lee County agency had been working on some other investigations that veered directly into the lane of Patty's case, and that investigation involved drug smuggling and money laundering. For now, I'm going to beg your patience. We'll get to that in a minute, the whole money laundering, drug smuggling thing. But this 1985 article went on to say that they thought Patty may have died accidentally or of natural causes, despite 7 years earlier, the Seminole County Sheriff's spokesman having unequivocally stated,
"We're positive Ms. Smith was murdered."
So what happened was, according to FDLE agent John Barr, the original Seminole County medical examiner believed it was strangulation, but her body was so badly decomposed it was impossible to say exactly. At that point, he was quoted as saying he was still 99% sure her death was not natural. He said he thought she died from suffocation or strangulation, but he said it also could have resulted from murder or an accident. FDLE agents told reporters their investigation was hampered from the start by an autopsy that labeled the death a homicide but couldn't state the cause. They also said crucial interviews were either missing or incomplete, and neighbors important to the investigation had moved. Essentially, Agent Barr started wondering if he had been going down the wrong path due to the confusion with the cause of death. He had been going by Emmy Gray's autopsy findings, so he decided he would enlist another medical examiner from the Orange County Medical Examiner's office to weigh in. Thomas Heegert said that Patty's heart was heavy for her age, which is a possible indicator of disease, so he couldn't rule out a heart attack, given that evidence of that would disappear soon after, coupled with her state of decomposure. There was nothing in the autopsy that indicated rape, and that wasn't even investigated, according to this article. The first medical examiner would contend that any evidence of rape could also have disappeared by the time of her autopsy. So that's an uncomfortable amount of, well, this could have happened, maybe, maybe not, when you're using the cause of death to lead your investigation. But that's not really what you're supposed to do, is it? Autopsy information is only one piece of information, and if two different medical examiners have told you they both can't be conclusive on something, what we have is a weak piece of evidence. You don't use it to lead you anywhere. You look at the rest of the evidence together and see where that leads. Where they all agreed is that both medical examiners believed that because Patty was found almost nude, the death may have involved some type of sexual activity. So let's look at that for a second. The doors of her home were locked, meaning her killer had to have locked at least one on his way out. Patty was found lying on top of a hand mirror, a wire coat hanger, and the cord of a dryer that was plugged into a socket above her head. Police said there were no signs of struggle. She was lying on her back with her head cushioned between two pillows. The sheriff's office website says today that she was strangled. If that attack occurred where she was found and she was strangled, you would expect to see some evidence of that struggle on and around the bed. But you also have to ask yourself if the scene actually did include a sexual component, or was it just staged to look that way? Police questioned Ramey Folk, Patty's boyfriend, who was a plumber and had reportedly lived with her for a time, according to one article. He adamantly denied that he'd killed her. But according to the 1985 article, where reporters spoke to both the original investigator and the FDLE agent, there was no written statement ever taken from the boyfriend. So I'm going to give you a second to procure an alcoholic beverage if you are inclined to have one in times of blatant ineptitude. But my gut tells me that we're missing a whole lot of context, because I'm not sure any investigator is that inept. Let's just hope there's something, because if no interview was ever recorded with the boyfriend during the initial investigation, then that's our second big problem, in addition to the medical examiner's reviews. Stunningly, the article went on to say,
within the last 3 weeks, FDLE agent John Barr ruled out his only 3 suspects: Apopka City Councilman Bill Arrowsmith, former VP of the bank where she worked, former Apopka car dealer Warren Musselwhite, and Ramey Folk, Smith's boyfriend.
Family members said that they asked Detective Simmons, the lead with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office on the case, to question Bill Arrowsmith, who worked with Patty, and another man named Warren Musselwhite, because of Patty's relationship with the bank. Quote,
but investigators in Lee County, who were looking into charges that Arrowsmith and Musselwhite were laundering drug money through the State Bank of Apopka, told Simmons to back off.
Now I can only imagine how that little nugget rippled through the Apopka breakfast spots and bleachers at local sporting events, as the kids of the local nurserymen and grocers and bankers tackled each other on the field while their parents whispered in the stands. And then Detective Simmons gets a call from an Alabama law enforcement agency saying that they've got someone up there who says he's got information about Patty Smith's murder. His name is James Weir, and he said that Bill Arrowsmith and Warren Musselwhite paid him $3,000 to drive them to Patty's house. He said they killed her because she found out they'd been using the Apopka bank where she worked to launder money. So, I guess in the next episode, we're going to need to talk about all that. Stay tuned.